Hello and welcome to Palm Sunday. So, this year's gospel reading, The Passion of the Christ, was from Luke. And I think Luke puts an interesting spin on things here. He leaves out certain details that we can find in Mark, Matthew, or John's gospels. He leaves out certain details, but he puts in other details that we're going to try and kind of discuss here. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire Passion because it is several pages in this Bible. This is really tiny print. So we're just going to go over some key points. So we know that on Thursday we had the Last Supper, right? And then Jesus goes out to pray. And then on Friday we have the Passion where Jesus is crucified. That's Good Friday. He dies around 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And then we have Saturday. And then we have Sunday where Jesus rises from the dead and Lent is over and I can eat cake again, right? So we start this off, the Passion officially starts off with the Last Supper, so they're all getting together here, and there's a great meme that I love, and it's just one of the disciples going, "Hey, Jesus, ready for the Last Supper?" And Jesus goes, "What?" And they're like, "Supper, regular Thursday dinner." So, but Jesus knew what he was heading into, right? And he had this last meal with his friends. You know, if you're going to college or if you're going to high school or if someone is leaving, you usually have like one last shebang, and that's exactly what this is here. And so Jesus breaks the bread and he says, "This is my body." He pours the wine, says, "This is my blood." And I'm sure they were kind of like, "That's weird." But Jesus does that kind of thing all the time, so maybe they were like, "Okay, we'll roll with it. They're sure this is his bread, this is his body. What is he talking about here?" Because Jesus knew what was going to happen, but they didn't. And so he's given them his bread and his blood here, and he prophesizes that one of them is going to betray him. And so this is almost like a scene in Mean Girls here, right? Jesus is, the head mean girl, and we've got his other followers here, and so it seems like he kind of wants to start some drama. He says, "One of you guys is going to betray me," and they're just like, "No, no." But maybe Jesus was in the background going, yeah, but it's not gonna be me. They aren't gonna know. So they start talking amongst themselves, like, who's gonna betray him, and why would we betray him? And then a little bit later, he goes on and he tells Peter kind of something similar. Well, we can rule Peter out here. We know Peter's not gonna betray him because he calls out Peter and he says, "Simon Peter, yo, before the cock crows 3 times, before the cock crows, you're gonna deny me 3 times." And Peter was kind of probably like, "What are you talking about? Why would I do that? I'm like, well, I'm one of your good friends. I'm your follower here. I've only been helpful to you. I've only been trying to spread your word. And here you are telling me I'm going to betray you? Like, that's just rude." So can you even imagine how Peter must have felt, or how one of the disciples must have felt when Jesus is making these big accusations like this? Like, "You're going to betray me. You're going to deny me. Maybe you're going to go into my closet and sell all my stuff and steal my stuff while I'm asleep." Like, who knows? And if you're Jesus' friend, if you're somebody's really close friend, you're trying to not to hurt them. You want to see them succeed, right? That you're building each other up in this relationship. And so they were probably kind of mildly offended. I know I would have been if one of my friends was like, "You're going to betray me, you suck." Like, okay, all right. So they roll with it though, right? Because Jesus is always giving these parables out, and he's always, he's spreading the good news. So we have the Last Supper, and then we go on to the garden where Jesus goes to pray. He goes up to pray, and he comes back down from the Mount of Olives. And who is there? We've got the betrayer here. We've got Judas. And Judas says, he's coming with some soldiers, and he says, "This man right here, the man that I kiss is, Jesus. He's given him up by kissing him on the lips," which is kind of a weird way. I mean, I guess he could have pointed, who knows. But maybe he thought he would be inconspicuous if he went up to Jesus and with a symbol of love, and so he tells the soldiers that this is Jesus, and the rest of the apostles are kind of like, "Dude, what'd you do that for?" So they're like, "Okay, you know what? Should we strike him with the sword?" And one of them, see, this is where Luke gets a little bit confusing here, right? Because it doesn't say why it was Judas. Why did Judas give up Jesus? We just know that it is, and then suddenly there's a bunch of violence, and where they cut off one of the high priest's servants' ears, and Jesus is like, "Guys, cut it out. You're not like this." And maybe they were just really riled up because of what Judas just did, but this is not a violent group of people, right? Jesus is not about violence. He's about peace, and he's about being humble, and he's all about that non-violent 70s kind of vibe protesting. And so Jesus heals the servant, even though he knows that these guys just came to take him away, he heals the servant. And I guess he left Judas with the disciples to figure out what to do with him. And so there's another gospel reading where it is said that Judas gives away Jesus for a bag of gold coins. So Luke doesn't say why Judas gave Jesus up, but we do know that they got all riled up and cut off one of the servants' ears. But either way, we know that Judas was kind of a bad seed. So we've got Judas betraying Jesus, and then our next thing is Peter. So now I guess the rest of the disciples are breathing easy because they know it's not them who's going to be giving up Jesus, right? They're not going to give him away. So then we have Peter's denial. So Jesus has been taken into custody. They're taking him up to the king, and this is kind of common knowledge, right? Because we have that mob that was trying to catch Jesus last weekend by telling him to pretty much murder this woman for no reason. Well, not for no reason, but because it was the law. And they knew Jesus wouldn't do it. So they had him stuck between that rock and that hard place last weekend, right? So all these people are kind of happy that, okay, we finally got Jesus. We got him this time. And so they're just, Peter's walking around town. They're probably just kind of thinking, oh man, they got him. Like, what's going to happen now? So they have Jesus, and they're talking to Peter and like, oh my gosh, hey, you know who Jesus is, right? And Peter's like, no. And somebody else asks him, and he's like, no, I have no clue who that is. I don't know Jesus. What Jesus? What's his name? What'd you say? And he denies him 3 times. And then he hears the cock crow, and then he goes, oh, nuts. He remembered what Jesus told him. Before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times. And we can see here that this is not the true mark of a disciple, right? This is not a true follower. We've got Judas, who betrays Jesus, and we've got Peter, who denies him because he's so worried about his own personal reputation that he's willing to throw his friend under the bus. So maybe Jesus should have picked his friends a little bit better, right? So now we've got Jesus, and he comes before Pilate. And Pilate's kind of like, what was he doing here? And the soldiers are like, arrest him. He thinks he's the Messiah. He thinks he's the Son of God. He thinks he's the king. This is heresy here. And Pilate questions him, and he's like, he's not guilty. He's done nothing. Maybe he's turned a few barrels of water into wine, but I think that makes people happy. He's done nothing wrong here. And so he sends him off to King Herod, because he's Galilean. And if you remember from the Star of Bethlehem, Herod's the one that wanted to kill him, which is why they had to stay in Bethlehem for so long, and he was just a little baby, and he went through all of this stuff. So he sends him over to Herod, and Herod's really excited to meet him. Herod's like he was hoping, this whole time, he was hoping to meet Jesus, he was hoping to see him even perform some kind of miracle. So they send Jesus over to King Herod. And Herod questions him, and they ridicule him a little bit, and then they dress him up in like this kingly garb just to mock him, and they send him back to Pilate. And Pilate's like, okay, well, Herod sent him back, so he didn't find anything wrong with him. He's not guilty. I don't think he's guilty. And so he says to the people, like, I don't think he's guilty here. But before we go on to that, we have the mob effect, right? Luke puts in this little tidbit here that Herod and Pilate had not been friends, but after they, both made fun of Jesus a little bit, they became best friends, which is kind of a random tidbit to put in here. Luke includes this, but not why Judas betrayed Jesus, and not, why Peter felt the need to deny Jesus 3 times. Not once, not twice, 3 times, and I bet, he would have done it again. So, we have Pilate, and he talks to the crowd, and he's telling these people, he's like, you know what, this man did nothing wrong, I'm gonna, rough him up a little bit and let him go. And all the people are like, nah, release Barabbas, release the guy. So Barabbas has been in jail. A little bit of background here. Barabbas has been in jail because he murdered somebody, and he took part in riots, and so he's a legitimate criminal. He, kind of deserves what's coming to him. But they want Barabbas released so that they can kill Jesus, because this was, you could trade a prisoner in this time. If they could release Barabbas, they could kill Jesus. And they're like, we want Jesus dead. So we've got mob theory here. So, we've got the whole mob. Everyone's riled up. Everyone's real excited. Let's release Barabbas. Let's get him out of the way. Who cares what he did? Whatever. He's fine. Let's forgive him. But let's not forgive the man who performed miracles and healed the sick and helped the homeless. Alright, so we've got that going on. So Pilate's like, okay, well, I guess we'll give the people what they want. And so they give Jesus the cross. And so here's where it gets a little bit interesting. So he's carrying the cross, and he had to carry his own cross, right? They're making fun of him, they're beating him up, they're whipping him. And he's carrying his own cross, and a bunch of women are falling behind him, and they're weeping. And Jesus says something kind of weird to them. And he says, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep instead for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming when people will say, 'Blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' At that time people will say to the mountains, 'Fall upon us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if these things are done when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" So Jesus is walking up the hill, and he's still talking, and not in tongues so much, but he's dropping some wisdom on these women. And he says some kind of weird things. It's not very clear. He's not like, "Yeah, don't cry, it'll be okay, I promise." He doesn't say, "I'm going to rise from the dead in 3 days, don't worry about it." He just says this kind of weird parable, like, "Blessed are the women who can't bear children, and the hills are going to come and fall upon us." So what he's saying here is, if we're grieving for things that are happening that we like right now, right? If we can't appreciate what we have, if we can't appreciate the woman who can have children, if we're like, whatever, that's nothing, that's no big deal, we're not going to be able to appreciate, we won't appreciate it when it's gone. And so he's saying, "Blessed are the women who are barren," because they know what it feels like to not be able to have a child, to not be able to give the world something that they really want to do. But the only people who feel that pain are them. So the same way, this is what Jesus is saying. The only people who know what's going on is the person who's on the inside, who has experienced it. So all these people, so he's kind of just alluding to it a little bit here. He's carrying the cross, and he knows what it feels like to go through all of this. So he's really the only one who can relate to this right now. These other people who feel sorry and they feel sad, or maybe they're really, really happy about this, they have no say in it because they don't know what he's going through. So this is just a weird way of him putting that out there. So then Jesus is on the cross, and he's between two criminals, right? Like, what a way to go. You're this innocent man. How demeaning, right? And you've got two murderers on either side of you. And the one of them has the audacity to turn to him and say, "Save yourself. You're Jesus Christ. You're the Son of God. Why aren't you saving yourself?" And the other one says, "Hey, dude, shut up. Be quiet. Don't you know who this is? Do you not know who this is? This is Jesus Christ. He will save us." And the man says, "Jesus, please forgive me." And Jesus forgive him. And since that man was actually sorry, he's on death row, Jesus forgave him, and he was able to go to heaven. And then, time passes, and Jesus passes away, and then we have the burial of Jesus, where someone named Joseph comes, and he puts the body in an empty tomb, and he seals it, and I think he stands guard outside of it. So there is the Passion of the Christ in a somewhat summarized form, right? So we can understand it a little bit better. So the crowd would rather release Barabbas. We have mob theory here, right? We have Jesus picking out his friends and saying who's going to betray him. And in this scene, we can see Jesus as more human, right? Because he knew these people were going to betray him, but he didn't let that bother him. He knew what he was getting into, but he didn't let that stop him. He is all-knowing, and he still went through with all of this for all of us. And now, see, we talked about Pilate a little bit before, and how but if we see Pilate in here, right? He's like, "Jesus, nothing wrong. I'm gonna release him." And we talked about Pilate before, where we know Pilate is like this cruel, murderous person, but here we get the sense that Pilate is this innocent guy who's just trying to be a good king to the people. He's just trying to give the people what they want. And we know that's not the case. So, but Pilate, there's not really much talk of Pilate in this gospel aside from that, and that's why it was so important and so cool that it was pointed out in that other gospel reading that Pilate went on a murderous rampage for no reason. So this is the Passion of Jesus Christ, and it's a really sad story, but it's also kind of exciting because we know that he rises from the dead, but none of these other people do. And so with that, this is why we have Palm Sunday, and I think it's just a great way to celebrate Jesus, to relive this and to go through it again. So I hope everybody has a really happy Easter, and I will see you next Sunday.